We're now going to look at some guidelines when prescribing and instructing resistance training programs. Remember again that some of these guidelines will vary if you're dealing with advanced clients or clients with injuries or illness. Warm-up is an essential part of your program. It increases blood supply and muscle temperature, leading to a reduced chance of injury and improved performance. Warm-up should be 5 to 10 minutes in length, elicit a light sweat and puff, not be too intense so that it diminishes performance in the conditioning phase. May include stretching, can be general or specific. An example of a general warm-up would be getting somebody on the rower for 5 minutes. This would increase blood flow and temperature to all parts of the body. With a specific warm-up, the client could perform a light set of bench press before performing the main sets. Stretching before workouts is currently a controversial topic. Traditionally, people would static stretch before a workout in an attempt to reduce injuries. Remember, static stretching is when you hold a stretch from anywhere between 15 to 40 seconds. However, most research suggests that static stretching before a session will not prevent injuries but will relax a muscle and depress its power. If we remember that most clients are limited by time, stretching for 5 to 10 minutes at the start and end of the program is probably not realistic. Performing static or P&F stretching at the end of the session is important, as it will allow you to stretch your muscle back to its ideal resting length after a workout. Some points to consider with stretching are: stretching is best performed while your muscles are still warm. Dynamic stretching can help prevent injuries for highly dynamic activities such as sprinting. It is therefore useful to perform this method of flexibility training before sport, but is probably not essential for more traditional workouts that do not contain the same level of dynamic activity. When performing static or P&F stretches at the end of the program, focus on muscles that are prone to tightness, such as pecs, lats and hip flexors. As discussed earlier, in most cases it is not essential to perform static stretches at the start of the program. However, when you have a particularly tight or overactive muscle, it may be worth stretching at the start or just before an exercise to stop this muscle affecting performance. If we now look at Renee performing a seated row, even though this is an upper back exercise, if Renee suffers from tight pecs, it could affect her range of motion and technique for this exercise. Stretching the pecs before this exercise can help lengthen these muscles, allowing her to perform better on this exercise. There are a number of factors that need to be considered with exercise order. Compound exercises involving large muscle groups should be done earlier in the program, whereas isolation exercises should be performed later in the program after compound exercises. To highlight the importance of exercise order and putting compound exercise before isolation exercises, we might look at an example where it's done poorly. Now what Renee's doing is she's performing an arm curl. Now as we've learnt with our functional anatomy, an arm curl is an exercise for the biceps. So when she performs the exercise, she pretty much goes to fatigue, so by the end of the exercise, she has a fair bit of muscle fatigue through her biceps muscle group. Now for her next exercise, Renee's going to come and do a seated row. So if you can put those dumbbells down, Renee, and get on the seated row. Unlike the arm curl, which is an isolation exercise, seated row now is a compound exercise involving a lot more muscles. One of those muscles involved is the biceps. Now Renee's going to work through this set, but what's going to happen maybe 5, 6 or 7 repetitions into it, she's going to start to experience fatigue in the biceps because she's just previously done some arm curls. This might mean that by the time she gets to the 8th or 9th rep, she has to cease performing this exercise, not because her back has had a good workout or latissimus dorsi or rhomboids, but because her biceps are fatigued, which means she's not going to get the benefits out of this exercise she'd hoped for. In relation to cardiovascular training, it is recommended that you perform your weight training and cardiovascular training on separate days. However, for a busy person limited to 3 sessions per week, this is not always realistic, and they will need to get their weights and cardio done in the same session. Resistance training should generally be done before cardio training, so that none of the fatigue associated with cardio training affects your performance for the resistance section of your program, although there may be some exceptions to this, which we will discuss later. Don't confuse cardio training with a warm-up. A warm-up should always be completed first. When discussing cardio training, we're talking about the conditioning phase. Most gyms will have a mixture of both free weights and machine weights. There are benefits of each, so we'll discuss them now. Working out with free weights will often require more assistance from stabiliser muscles. It can also allow for a greater variety in exercise and movement patterns. However, free weights are often less safe and require the trainer to have a spotter while training. Free weights are usually a cheaper option than machine weights also. Machine weights, however, can provide a much safer alternative, especially when you're dealing with beginner clients. They can also allow you to train at a greater intensity when by yourself because a spotter is not required, as the machine will support the weight if you fail. Another benefit of machine weight training is that it is often more time efficient. A busy person that might only have half an hour for a lunch break can come in quickly, set up the machines using the pin, and not have to set up barbells and dumbbells that can be time consuming in the setup process. A lot is said about working through full range of motion. This will allow your muscle to get the most out of the exercise. However, we probably need to add on top of that we want you to work through full, pain-free, functional range of motion. So to explain this, I might look at Renee with the bench press. Often it's said that with a bench press you should take the bar all the way to the chest. But I'm going to put Renee through a bit of a test to check her range of motion before she performs a bench press. So I'm going to grab her hand and see what her range of motion is like at her shoulder. Now, as we see with Renee, she's got a nice smooth range of motion. I'm not noticing any restriction. So in regards of range of motion on a bench press, it'd be fine for Renee to take the bar to just above chest level. However, if I performed this test with Renee and I found that she got to about this point here and I was starting to notice restriction, that suggests to me that taking her all the way to the chest level will be forcing her past her functional pain-free range of motion and might put some pressure on the shoulder, in particular the anterior capsule. So in that case, I may tell Renee, rather than working through full range of motion, just to stop it maybe 5 or 10 centimetres above the chest. To highlight the importance of education, we're going to have a look at the seated row. Now, under the first scenario, when I explain the exercise to Renee, I'm going to ask her to retract her shoulder blades when she performs the movement. Now, under a second scenario, I'm going to explain to Renee, listen Renee, what I want you to do is when you do this exercise, I want you to retract your shoulder blades. This is important because it's going to open up your chest and it's going to improve these muscles here between your shoulder blades, which help with posture. Now, by explaining it that way, she's more likely to now understand the importance of retracting her shoulder blades, which means as a gym instructor, when she goes off on her own, she's now more likely to follow through with the instructions. It's vital that your client maintains good posture and good technique throughout all exercises. As we can see here with Renee, what's starting to happen is, in an attempt to get out some extra repetitions to overload and work at that extra intensity, Renee's lost her posture and lost her technique. Now, we don't want this to occur because this creates bad movement patterns, also increases the likelihood of injury. So when encouraging your clients to work to failure, what we want to see is work to failure with correct technique. As soon as technique deteriorates, you're best to cease performing the set.